Hello everyone, I'm your host Adriyan, and today we are with a well-known Swedish philosopher, Alexander Bard, and we are going through several matters, cultural topics about the future of Iran, which I'd like to know the knowledge and wisdom of Alexander about it. So, hello Alexander, happy to have you here.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Would you like to give us some background information, how you got interested about Iran and Iranian philosophy?
Sure. I was a philosophy student, of course, in the 1970s and 1980s. And I realized that in my generation, we can't really start philosophy with the Greeks. We have to go much deeper into history and especially into Asian history. So I started studying Eastern philosophy. And then I discovered that most Westerners who studied the East were focusing on India or China. When I traveled through Asia in the 1980s and met a lot of different people and studied the literature, I discovered that actually Asian history is three different distinct fields. It's China, India, and Iran. And I got really interested in Iranian philosophy, especially pre-Islamic Iranian philosophy. And I even learned ancient Iranian so I could speak the language, the Avesta language, so I could understand it, the way you learn Sanskrit if you want to study Indian history. And I even came to the conclusion that I would be happy to convert to Zoroastrianism, which I did in the early 1990s, the whole ceremony, and I became a Zoroastrian. So I am a Western converted Zoroastrian today, and I'm, of course, very proud to be a part of the Iranian philosophical tradition, which is incredibly rich, full of ideas, and I think today important not only for Iran, but important globally, because Iran is also at the center of the connection between East and West. And now we have to have a much more global agenda. The East and the West have to understand each other better. I think the absolute key to this understanding is Iran.
Great, interesting. Would you please tell me some positive point that you got about Zoroastrianism to be inspired to convert to it?
Well, what's important with Zoroastrianism is that it's the only phallic monist religion. So let me rephrase that. Monist means that Zoroastrians genuinely believe there's only one world and everything in this world is interconnected with everything else. So do the Buddhists of India, and so do the Taoists of China. And the reason why Taoism, Buddhism, and Zoroastrianism have so much in common is because of the Silk Route. I would even say that you could call these three religions the Silk Route Triad, and only think the reason we're talking about Taoism, Buddhism, and Zoroastrianism as separate religions or separate schools of thought is simply because we also make a differentiation between India, Iran, and China. But what's interesting with Zoroastrianism is also not only that it's monist, it's also the fact that it's related to Buddhism in a very interesting way. It's like Zoroastrianism and Buddhism as a couple play the same role that Yang and Yin do within Taoism in China. So whereas the Chinese traditions always try to put the phallic of Yang and the magical of Yin together into one faith and create some kind of harmony or balance between the two, the Iranians and the Indians have long understood that it's not really about balance or harmony between the phallic and the magical, but that the phallic and the magical serve different purposes. So I'm very, very happy today to get engaged with many Buddhists. For example, John Farvarki is a friend of mine. He's huge on YouTube these days. He's a Canadian Buddhist convert, and I'm a European Zoroastrian convert. And the conversation we can have today between Zoroastrians and Buddhists are incredibly rich and fruitful. The reason for this is that Buddhism is ultimately a matrical monist religion. So say you worship the goddess or the mother in a deep sense, like you worship circularity, you worship that everything returns to the same. You might even have reincarnation as part of your worldview, so that everything returns to the same point all over again. That is essentially what Buddhism deals with. And this is very Indian. But what the Iranians discovered with Zoroastrianism was that we could also construct a religion based on the phallic, which is where are we going to go? Where are we heading? So the phallic is always about a vision and then a strategy on how to get to that destination. This is, of course, for Westerners, this is, of course, the exodus out of Egypt, how the Hebrews walked out of Egypt. But that is more or less a replica of an originally Iranian idea. The Messiah, for example, or Moshiach in Judaism, is originally Zoroastrian, and it's called the Sociant, the idea of the Savior that arrives at a specific moment in time to save us. Or the Sociant could also be a group of people who lead us out of our predicaments and out of our existential angst towards some kind of a paradise or a better world. This idea I find incredibly interesting, and I think it's exactly what's needed now in the 21st century. I think we need to return to the idea of the phallic. The problem, though, is that when you look at the phallic ideas in Judaism and Christianity and Islam, they're all based on Plato's dualistic idea that there are ideas out there that are perfect, and we live in a very fallible world that is imperfect. But in reality, the Zoroastrians always said, no, that's not the case. We live in the world as it is. And whatever ambitions we have to create a better world than the one we have today is part of the mission of the Sociant. So to be a Zoroastrian is to cultivate the idea of civilization, cultivate the idea that with each generation, we can learn from each other and create a constantly better world. And Zoroastrianism is still the only religion that unifies the correct world view, which is the monist worldview. So you study physics today, everything is interconnected with everything else. So physics today, modern physics has taught us that the world is truly monist. Mind and body are never separate. Mind and body always interact with each other. Everything interacts with everything else. So if you want to be truthful to science today, you have to be a monist. But the only phallic religion that has a monist worldview is Zoroastrianism.
Excellent. I still want to add something in your speech. You brought a very interesting point about Zoroastrianism and how it looks at the whole existential world. Many people, they think that Zoroastrianism was the first monotheistic religion. Monotheistic means there is only one God. But it's unfortunately misunderstanding from Zoroastrianism. In Zoroastrian worldview, it doesn't emphasize on one God. What is the benefit of having one God or thousands of God or no God? This is not what Zoroastrians teaching us, but it says the whole world is interconnected and they are connected to each other. So the whole world is one, not there is only one God. And the matter of Sociant also was interesting. We should still remember that there are concepts that have been borrowed from Zoroastrianism to other religions or other point of view, but the quality of that concept is not exactly as it was in Zoroastrianism. For example, when we come to this concept of Sociant, you can become a Sociant. Someone else can become Sociant means beneficial for the world due to their constructive deeds, their constructive work in the human society. So in Zoroastrianism, we are not accepting that one day one Sociant come from somewhere and save us, but we are encouraged to make ourselves with having a useful pattern as a Sociant to work better in improving the world through advancement. Am I right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I call it to be sociantic. So you can be a sociantic person. You can wake up in the morning and meditate and then concentrate on what can you do well during that day. This is the best way to describe it in contemporary English, is to say you want to have a constructive mindset. And this is the principle of Ashura. It's the only ethical principle you need, and it's the only ethical principle in Zoroastrianism. So at any given time, you take the best of your knowledge, the best wisdom you have, you collaborate with other people who support you and cover your weaknesses, essentially. You build your team of people, and then you take on a sociantic approach to reality. So you walk out into the world and say, what can I do to improve on the world today? This is of course a beautiful mindset to just share, and don't confuse it with anything else. And this is the principle of Asha. And Asha in Zoroastrianism is both how the world works. It literally means how things work in ancient Persian. So Asha is a principle for how the world operates. So that's what science does. You walk out in the world, you try your different theses, and you say, oh, okay, this is how the world works. But Asha is also an ethical principle. So why not work in collaboration with how things work? Of course, this is inherited in Taoism in China. It's called Tao. So they have a similar approach there. So Taoism is very closely related to Zoroastrianism. It's almost like a Chinese version of Zoroastrianism. So you try to find the way on how things work, and then you try to find your own way for how you want to collaborate with the world and with other people around you to improve on the world. This is to have a sociantic mindset. And if you purify your mind, so you clean your mind through meditation and contemplation, and then just focus on how can I contribute to this world in the best way possible, then you got an excellent ethical principle. You don't need the 10 commandments of Judaism. You don't need all the rules in the books of Islam and Christianity at all, because you have one simple principle, and that's all you need. The opposite of that, then, of course, is druj. And druj is essentially to have a destructive mindset. Destructive mindset means that you harbor bitterness in your heart. It's like you have an attitude towards life like, I didn't get what I wanted out of life, and because I was unfortunate, I'm going to put revenge onto the world, and I'm going to feel envious towards other people because of the successes they have. You're only going to become your own enemy with that mindset. But unfortunately, the world is also full of druj. It's full of destructive mindsets that want nothing good for others and nothing good even for themselves. And when you get into this sort of the comfort of not wanting to improve on the world, the comfort of really liking that the world goes down with you, this sort of very sort of destructive, suicidal mindset, that's called druj. And that's the opposite of Asha. So these are the very simple ethical principles we have in Zoroastrianism. I also want to say that you're right about the one God thing. The reason why we talk about one God in Zoroastrianism, because the idea comes from Zoroastrianism, is simply because we want to share a narrative, and we want to share a vision, and want to share an idea where we're going together. So say you're within a tribe or a community of people, and you decide that we're going to get there. We're going to improve our lives and our world. We're going to improve on our life, and we're going to get to a certain point, and that's going to be the direction we're heading. This is what's needed. What's needed is one shared narrative. Today, we will even need a shared narrative for all of humanity, because we're now 8 billion people who share the same planet. And for this planet to survive, and for us to survive on this planet, we need to share this narrative. And this is where Zoroastrianism comes into the picture today, because it is a universal religion. It sets up the conditions for actually creating that kind of grand narrative. And that's the kind of work I do now as a Zoroastrian philosopher. But what's important here is that God in itself has many different aspects. There's the magical aspect of God, which Buddhism thrives on, which is, do we take care of everybody in the tribe? Do we push everybody forward? Do we support everybody so they have the means to, do we educate our children? All those desires are magical. But we also have the phallic one, which is, where are we going? Where are we heading? Where is the promised land? And how can we get there? And Zoroastrianism includes both these aspects.
Excellent. Alexander, one of the unique features of this worldview, Zoroastrian worldview, that I could recognize is, for those people who do not believe in any God, even if they are atheist, or those who, for example, believe in reincarnation and becoming to the world again and again, still Zoroastrianism doesn't make conflicts. I mean, I have friends who are atheists, but still they are 100% thinking that if we do not use this Zoroastrian's worldview in a destroyed society to make it work constructive, we won't achieve the glory for that society for the future. So they are just not believing in God at all, but still they think this worldview can push any society towards advancement and righteousness, and making the better place for living, not only for human, but for animals and plants. Don't you think the same about different people with different ideas of God can also feel comfortable with Zoroastrianism?
Well, to begin with, Zoroastrianism was the religion of the first Persian Empire, and it was the first empire ever in human history that tolerated that people could have different faiths. They could have different ethnicities. There was imperial construction, which was brilliant. It was about 600 before Christ, and that's precisely why the Persians essentially invented the idea that you can have a plurality of ideas and a plurality of religions within the same empire and collaborate through trade. So that is a Zoroastrian idea in itself. But Zoroastrianism itself doesn't have these problems that you discuss here. Atheism, to me, is essentially a Western problem, and it deals with the collapse of Christianity. That's why it starts with Friedrich Nietzsche in the 19th century, and he declares the death of God. But that's the Christian God he's talking about. He's even talking specifically about the Protestant Christian God and the death of Protestantism. We don't have the problem in Zoroastrianism simply because our concept of God is Ahura Mazda. And Ahura Mazda has two different entities. Ahura is existence itself, that which exists. And Mazda is to give sense to that existence. So you could say that that's like consciousness, like we as human beings experience human consciousness. So the conscious experience of existence is Ahura Mazda. And we are personifying Ahura Mazda as human beings. Now, if we unify our forces, so we as together as a community strive to reach a certain point, or a certain vision we're heading for. The name for that vision is God. God is basically the name of where we're going to go. Originally in the tribe was the Ur-fathers. It was like the fathers of the fathers who led us. So the men who led us at the front and the women who backed us up at the back, you would have an idea of an Ur-father before them and an Ur-mother behind them. This is what Zoroastrians have inherited. We don't have the problem with atheism because, number one, the universe itself, everything that exists is Ahura. Even what potentially can exist can be included in Ahura according to Zoroastrianism. And Mazda is simply how we deal with that. So that's the sense we have of experiencing the world and interacting with the world and collaborating with the world to be fully human. And Ahura Mazda is simply this idea that just like we can all be dissociant, we can all work on the improvement of the world, we can all be part of personifying Ahura Mazda. But I'd be very careful to say that you are Ahura Mazda, I am Ahura Mazda, because that's again a very Western idea of individualism. And in Zoroastrianism, it is the community that's important. What the Muslims later inherited and called the Ummah, what the Christians later inherited and called the church, what the Jews later inherited and called the synagogue or the congregation. All these ideas of the congregation as being sacred come from Zoroastrianism. And in Zoroastrianism, this is called the Daina. The Daina is the community that's sacred, and the Daina can personify Ahura Mazda. We can, when the whole community is working within Asha, and Asha is flowing through us within the community, we start to personify Ahura Mazda. So we don't have the problem with atheism. Atheism to Zoroastrian be like saying, that's like pretending the universe does not exist. And that's like pretending human beings with a consciousness do not exist. Obviously, there are human beings that are conscious, and certainly subconscious too. And there is a universe within which we exist. That's undeniable. And that's why we don't have the atheism problem. We also don't really have the problem with reincarnation. And I would like to emphasize that the reincarnation comes from too much of a focus on the magical, too much of a focus on that everybody should follow, everybody should come with us. And it's only when you're lacking a vision and direction, so you don't have a goal in your own life, you start to think of reincarnation. It's only when your life becomes so meaningless because you have no vision, there's no direction, you don't know where to go, where to put meaning into your life. You don't have a future ahead of you. That's when the ideas of reincarnation start to pop up. Like, well, because I cannot live my life fully, I have to live my life again. But you will never consciously come back in a new life form because your consciousness is tied to your body. This is fundamental to Zoroastrianism. We firmly believe in an embodied mind. This exactly was the Ahura Mazda. Mazda is tied to Ahura. There can be no sense, there can be no consciousness without it being tied to physical existence. So the same goes for human beings. You are not a mind without a body. That's a very Platonist idea. That's a Gnostic idea. And Zoroastrianism is very much against Gnosticism. So no, we are unified. We're embodied minds, meaning that your mind is totally unified with your body, and actually your mind will need the body to operate. And because your body is unique, also your mind is unique. So I don't have a problem, having people that believe in some kind of reincarnation around me, but it's probably a very sophisticated form of reincarnation, not necessarily one where you die one day and you wake up as a baby the next day in a new body and remember everything that happened to you in your previous life. I've never met a baby who'd lived for 98 years before they were born, and until that happens, some kind of hardcore reincarnation is obviously not on the cards. And thank God it isn't, because the ambition of Zoroastrians is not to live forever, and Zoroastrians is not to live again and again. That would be horrible. The ambition of Zoroastrians is to live ameritat, is to reach wholeness, to have lived the full life, to have been a full human being, to have been born, to have been a child, to have been a grown-up, and to one day be a wise older man or a woman who can contribute and lead to the whole tribe. This idea of being lucky enough to live a whole life is the beautiful idea of ameritat, which is central to Zoroastrians.
Thank you. I think those Iranians who are listening to this valuable words and knowledge from you, they already got why it's so important to spread Zoroastrianism in the society. I really appreciate your time, Alexander. It was many of points that you brought. It was really mind-provoking. And I would say big thanks to you, especially from those Iranians who are supposed to listen to your words and think and rethink about the importance of implementing Zoroastrianism in the society for building the country for a better future. And
yes,
we should have these discussions in the future. So thank you. And would you
thank
like
you
to
so
say
much, Arvin. I enjoyed having the conversation with you. I would love to continue the conversation.